Welcome back, horror fans, to Real Talk Horror. I'm your host, Josh Bell, and today we're going to dive headfirst into the blood, guts, and brilliance of one of the most legendary filmmakers in horror history, John Carpenter. But today, we're not just talking about horror. We're talking about a film that's as much a wake-up call as it is a wild ride. That's right. We're kicking off Phase 3 of our Carpenter Chronicles with They Live, his iconic 1988 sci-fi horror masterpiece. Now let's set the scene. It's 1988 November. They Live hits theaters, blending dystopian sci-fi, razor-sharp satire, and Carpenter's signature horror style. It's a film that dares to peel back the curtain on society's hidden truths, using sunglasses, of all things, to reveal a world ruled by subliminal messaging and alien overlords. And here's the kicker. It feels as relevant today as it did back then, maybe even more so. In this episode, we'll unpack what makes They Live so unforgettable. From its sly commentary on consumerism and control, to its iconic characters and endlessly quotable lines. Yes, you know, I'll be talking about I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. Yeah, we're covering it all. But before we dive in, let's take a moment to appreciate John Carpenter's incredible contribution to horror. This is the man who gave us Halloween, redefining the slasher genre. The Thing, a masterclass in paranoia and practical effects. With They Live, Carpenter shifts gears, leaning heavily into political and social commentary. Why take this turn? What drove him to this story at this moment in time? That's what we're going to try to explore. All right, folks, get your metaphorical sunglasses because we're about to uncover some hidden truths. Let's jump into the world of They Live. Let's get right into the plot. Don't worry, this will stay spoiler-free for anyone who hasn't yet experienced the brilliance of They Live. The film follows a drifter plagued by none other than professional wrestling icon Rowdy Roddy Piper. Nada is down on his luck, wandering through a bleak, economically devastated America. He's a man with no home, no job, no future, until he stumbles upon a discovery that changes everything. One day, he finds a pair of sunglasses, but not just any sunglasses. When he puts them on, he sees the world for what it truly is. A place where humanity is being manipulated and controlled by subliminal messages. Billboards, magazines, and TV broadcasts are all laced with commands like obey, consume, conform. But it doesn't stop there. Nada also discovers that many of the people walking among us are not people at all. They're aliens. These hidden overlords live as an elite class, exploiting humanity for their own gain while keeping the rest of us blissfully unaware. It's a concept that's part sci-fi thriller, part horror, and part biting social commentary. And while the premise itself is wild and fun, They Live digs so much deeper. Themes of paranoia, societal control, and rebellion run throughout, making this more than just an entertaining film. It's a scathing critique of capitalism, consumerism, and class warfare. Carpenter uses this dystopian lens to hold up a mirror to society. And honestly, the reflection is as relevant now as it was in the late 80s. Now let's talk characters. Roddy Piper's Nada is a fascinating lead. Not your traditional polished action hero, but that's what makes him work. Piper brings a rugged everyman charisma to the role, paired with the right amount of action hero grit. He's relatable, but also really badass, especially when he starts taking the fight to the aliens. Then we have Keith David as Frank, who provides the perfect counterbalance to Nada. Frank is grounded, cautious, and morally complex. The dynamic between Piper and David is so electric, and their relation builds some of the film's best tension. Oh, and we have to talk about this fight scene later. The one that seems to go on forever but never gets old. You know what I'm talking about. Even if you haven't seen it, you probably know. Ultimately, They Live feels right at home in Carpenter's lineup, but it also stands out as uniquely its own. It's a sci-fi horror hybrid, and it combines his distinct knack for suspense with sharp, unapologetic satire. Carpenter's trademark style is here in spades, but he uses it to tell a story that feels so much bigger than the genre itself. And honestly, that's what really makes this film such a standout. Let's take a peek behind the curtain of They Live, because as always with John Carpenter, there's more to this film than meets the eye, sunglasses or not. The movie was made on a modest $3 million budget, which honestly feels like a miracle when you see how much Carpenter managed to squeeze out of it. The small budget, again, wasn't a limitation. It was a challenge that Carpenter embraced. Filming took place on the streets of Los Angeles, and the gritty urban decay you see on screen wasn't just a backdrop, it was a statement. It adds a raw authenticity to the world of They Live, reflecting the economic struggles and societal fractures the film critiques. And of course, Carpenter didn't just direct this movie. Oh no, the man is a one-man band, quite literally. He co-wrote the screenplay under the pseudonym Frank Armitage, a nod to H.P. Lovecraft, by the way. He composed the film's soundtrack. That synth-heavy score is pure Carpenter, ominous, driving, and perfectly in sync with the film's tension and rebellion. It sets the mood before a single line of dialogue is spoken, and we'll talk more about its impact later. Now let's talk about casting, because this is where Carpenter's instincts really shine. Choosing Rowdy Roddy Piper for the role of Nada was bold. At the time, Piper was known for his wrestling career, not for acting. But Carpenter saw something in him, something rugged, rebellious, unapologetic. Piper brought a natural charisma and physicality to the role that made Nada feel like a genuine everyman who's ready to take on the world. And then there's Keith David, who was already part of Carpenter's cinematic family, thanks to that unforgettable role in The Thing. Keith David is the grounding force of this movie. His character, Frank, brings a layer of humanity and moral complexity that contrasts beautifully with Piper's no-nonsense approach. And their chemistry is dynamite. They don't just carry the story, they really elevate it. And of course, we can't forget the iconic sunglasses, the Hoffman lenses. That's right, those shades are more than just a cool accessory. They're a storytelling device that's both simple and genius. With just one prop, Carpenter peels back the facade of normalcy and exposes a hidden world of manipulation. The obey aesthetic, inspired by 1950s propaganda art, gives the film its distinct visual identity and has become sort of a pop culture phenomenon. But let's not sugarcoat it. They Live had a rocky reception at first. It hit theaters in November 1988, right as blockbusters like Die Hard were dominating the box office. Critics were divided. Some dismissed it as overly simplistic, while others still praised its audacity and social critique. Audiences didn't exactly flock to see it either, and it barely made a profit. Here's the twist. You guessed it, over time, They Live found its audience. Today, it's a certified cult classic. Fans have embraced its biting commentary and its unique style, and it's become a go-to reference for discussions about media, control, and power structures. Like many Carpenter films, it wasn't appreciated in its time, but again, it's aged like a fine wine. Scratch that, like a rebellious shot of whiskey. So while it may not have been a commercial juggernaut, They Live proved once again that John Carpenter doesn't just make movies, he makes statements. And this one, it's loud, it's unapologetic, and it's absolutely unforgettable. Now, what makes They Live so unmistakably John Carpenter? If you've even seen one of his films, you know that he has a style that is all his own. A blend of slow burn tension, striking visuals, and music that lingers in your bones. With They Live, Carpenter adds another layer to his repertoire by seamlessly blending suspense with razor-sharp satire. First, let's talk the pacing. Carpenter doesn't rush. He lets the story simmer, giving the mystery room to breathe. The early scenes where Nada wanders through the city are deliberately slow, almost hypnotic. This isn't just filler. It's Carpenter setting the stage, pulling you into a world that feels gritty and lived in. By the time Nada finally discovers the sunglasses, you're as curious and unsettled as he is. This is supreme tension building. And when the big reveals start dropping, they hit like a freight train. Then there's Carpenter's visual style. The man loves his wide-angle shots, and They Live is no exception. These shots give the film a sense of scope, making you feel the weight of the desolate, crumbling cityscape. The streets of Los Angeles are character of this film. They're vast, they're unwelcoming, and they hide secrets in plain sight. Carpenter uses these wide shots not just to set the mood, but to reinforce the film's themes of isolation and hidden control. Oh, and the aliens? Those grotesque skeletal faces with bulging eyes and skin like dried out plastic. And those will stick with your nightmares. The genius here in the design is simplicity. They're not over-the-top monsters. They're unnervingly human-like, making them even more unsettling. Carpenter's practical effects work wonders, giving the aliens a texture and physicality that CGI just can't replicate. It's a perfect example of how Carpenter can make a modest budget look like $1 million. Well, $3 million in this case. Now there's the soundtrack. Carpenter teamed up with Alan Howarth to create a score that's integral to the film, as integral as the sunglasses themselves. The music is sparse, but it's powerful. It's built around that simple, haunting theme, that main track, equal parts ominous and hypnotic. Feels like a heartbeat driving the narrative forward. It's steady, a relentless pulse that keeps you on edge, creating unease even in the quieter moments. Carpenter's synthesizer-heavy style has always been iconic, but here it's especially effective. It complements the film's eerie undertones and rebellious spirit. What I love about Carpenter's approach in They Live is how minimalist it all is. There's no excess, no unnecessary fluff. Every shot, every note, every line of dialogue serves purpose. This restraint is what makes the satire hit so hard. It's not buried under flashy effects or convoluted plot twists. Instead, it's delivered with the precision of a scalpel. So what sets They Live apart in Carpenter's filmography? It's that perfect balance of suspense and commentary. It's a film that makes you think, even as it makes your pulse quicken. It's clever, unsettling, and quintessentially Carpenter. A reminder that sometimes less is more, and with the right vision, even a modest budget can create something absolutely unforgettable. They Live isn't just a movie. It's a cultural touchstone that continues to echo through decades of pop culture and social commentary. At its core, the film is that razor-sharp critique of power structures, consumerism, and mass media. And when you think about how our modern world operates, constant advertising, algorithms feeding us curated content, subtle messages shaping our desires, it's almost eerie how prophetic Carpenter's vision was. It's like he looked into the future and gave us a warning wrapped in a sci-fi action thriller. And then there's that iconic "Obey" slogan. What a stroke of brilliance. Carpenter took something as simple as a word and infused it with an unsettling resonance that transcends the screen. It's not just a line from the movie. It's become a statement, a symbol. Think about street artist Shepard Fairey and his "Obey" campaign. It started as an homage to They Live, but it grew into its own cultural movement, spreading across cities, galleries, and social media. Fairey took the message of the film and turned it into art that confronts us in our everyday lives, challenging us to question what we're being told and who's in control. That's a level of influence most movies can only dream of. Now we have to talk about that alley fight. You know the one, the legendary 6-minute brawl between Nada and Frank. It's almost comically excessive, right? But that's what kind of makes it unforgettable. On the surface, it's two guys beating the hell out of each other over a pair of sunglasses. But underneath, it's a metaphor for how hard it is to make people see the truth. Carpenter could have made it a quick scuffle, but instead he gave us a scene that's brutal, hilarious, and oddly relatable. It's been parodied, memed, and referenced countless times, whether it's in a South Park episode or even modern-day YouTube skits. That fight has cemented itself as one of the most iconic scenes in film history. But here's the thing. They Live isn't just remembered for its slogans or its fight scenes. It's the way John Carpenter blended the social commentary with the kind of storytelling that sticks with you. That's the real legacy. Filmmakers like Jordan Peele and Guillermo del Toro have openly cited They Live as a major influence. Peele, for example, talked about how its social commentary inspired his own work on Get Out. Think about that. A movie about aliens and sunglasses paved the way for one of the most important horror films of the 21st century. Guillermo del Toro, too, has praised Carpenter's ability to use genre as a vehicle for deeper messages. What's remarkable to me is that They Live didn't make a huge splash when it first came out. It was a modest hit, sure, but over time, it grew into this whole cult phenomenon. And that's because it's more than just a sci-fi film or an action movie. It's a movie that has big questions about who holds the power, how they keep it, and what we're willing to do to take it back. Those questions don't have an expiration date, which is why the film feels just as relevant now, or more relevant now, than it did in 1988. That's the magic of They Live. It's not just a movie you watch, it's a movie that stays with you. You can laugh at its campy moments. You can cheer during its action scenes. But when the credits roll, it leaves you thinking. It's a film that dares to confront you, to hold up a mirror to the world we live in and ask, are you really seeing the whole picture? It's the rare kind of art that's both wildly entertaining and deeply thought-provoking. John Carpenter didn't give us a movie. He gave us a legacy, one that's inspiring filmmakers, artists, and audiences to see the world with clearer eyes and maybe even stand up to fight back. When They Live hit theaters in 1988, the response was complicated. Critics back then had mixed feelings about the film, with some of it calling it heavy-handed. They pointed to the overt messaging, the alien invasion plot, and even the infamous alley fight and said, all right, John Carpenter, maybe dial it back a notch. It was dismissed by many as too blunt, too on the nose, even for a sci-fi satire. But here's the thing about time. It's the ultimate critic. And over the years, They Live has undergone a complete reevaluation. Today, it's hailed as a visionary critique of consumer culture and social control. What was once considered heavy-handed is now praised for its boldness and unapologetic wit. Modern audiences don't just accept its message. They embrace it, recognizing it as one of Carpenter's most daring and thought-provoking works. And let's be honest, part of that appraisal has to do with the world we live in today. The themes of control, manipulation, and rebellion feel more relevant than ever. In an era where targeted ads follow you everywhere, where social media algorithms shape how we think and what we see, They Live doesn't feel like a product of the past. It feels like a prophecy. Carpenter was holding up that mirror to the Reagan-era consumerism of the 80s, but in doing so, he captured something timeless. That's why the film resonates so strongly today. In this polarized world, it doesn't just critique, it challenges us to open our eyes, literally and figuratively, to the systems of power around us. What's truly remarkable is how the film has seeped into pop culture. Again, the obey slogan and the subliminal messaging of They Live have become shorthand for anti-establishment ideas, referenced by artists, comedians, and other filmmakers. The internet's role in its renaissance, memes, GIFs, YouTube breakdowns have all brought They Live to a whole new generation, who see it not just as a film, but as a cultural critique that has teeth. This resurgence of appreciation speaks to Carpenter's genius. He made a film that was entertaining, but also deeply layered. And while it might have taken a while for the world to catch up, They Live now stands as one of his most enduring works. So if you ask me, the journey of They Live is proof that great art doesn't always get recognized right away. Sometimes it needs time to marinate, to sit in the cultural consciousness until the world is ready to appreciate it. And in the case of They Live, we're still unpacking those layers, still finding new relevance in its themes, and still marveling at how one filmmaker dared to speak the truth to power in a way that's as compelling now as it ever was. Now let's dive into some of the key scenes that really make They Live unforgettable. First, the moment Nada first put on the sunglasses is one of the most chilling scenes in the entire film. Think about it. The ordinary, everyday world we see through our own eyes is suddenly peeled back to reveal a completely different reality. Through the glasses, Nada can see the world for what it really is. Advertising becomes a sinister tool of control. People are revealed as alien overlords, and slogans like obey and consume suddenly take on a whole new, terrifying meaning. Carpenter's use of the black and white lens to highlight this shift is brilliant. The world is either us or them. There's no gray area once those glasses are on. It's so unsettling because it's like we're seeing the truth too for the first time. You feel what Nada feels. This sudden and overwhelming realization that everything you thought was real is a lie. And that feeling really sticks with you. Then, of course, we briefly mentioned it before, the infamous fight scene between Nada and Frank. I can't help but highlight just how important that scene is, both as a moment of action and as a metaphor for the entire film. It's brutal, it's drawn out, it's totally WWE, and it's comically excessive. But that's why it's so effective. It's not just two guys fighting over a pair of sunglasses. It's two men fighting for their freedom. Frank doesn't want to put on the glasses because he doesn't want to see the truth. And Nada is desperately trying to make him. This physical, almost slapstick-like battle is a perfect embodiment of the resistance against authority, against the forces that control and manipulate. There's humor in it, sure, but the underlying tension is always there. It's the strange blend of absurdity and seriousness that Carpenter does so well throughout the film. It's a fight that in some ways we're all involved in. Do we face the truth no matter how painful, or do we stay blind to it and accept the world as it is? What sets the film apart from others in the genre, though, is the way Carpenter blends the satire and the horror. On the surface, it's a sci-fi film about aliens controlling human society. But dig just a little deeper, and you see a scathing critique of that consumerism, the corporate greed, and the ways in which we're all complicit in this system. Carpenter doesn't just entertain. You're not just sitting back for mindless thrills. He challenges you to think. They Live isn't just asking you to pay attention to the action or the visual spectacle. It's asking you to look at the world around you and question everything. It's about waking up, opening your eyes to the manipulation that happens on a global scale, and deciding whether or not you're willing to do something about it. That's what makes They Live special. It's not content to just be a fun, cheesy sci-fi action flick. It's a film with a message that is so powerful today, more so than it was in the 80s. Carpenter uses humor and genre conventions as a Trojan horse to deliver something much more impactful. They Live is about resistance. It's about waking up to the world's lies and standing up for what's right, even when the fight seems impossible. This is a film that'll stick with you, not just because of its wild concepts and action-packed moments, because it asks you to think differently about the world around you, and that, I think, is what makes this not a cult classic, but a true classic. All right, after all we've discussed here, where does They Live stand? To me, it's one of the absolute standouts in John Carpenter's career. It's one of those films that doesn't stick to genre conventions, it breaks them open. It's bold, it's brash, it's brilliant, using its sci-fi premise as a platform to tackle some pretty heavy issues, from the consumerism to social control. Carpenter created something that not only entertained, but it also made me think. And that's a rare achievement in film. For me, this is a 9 out of 10. It's not perfect. It gets a little campy. There's some cheese that doesn't quite land every time. But the overall vision, the gripping narrative, and the timeless themes make it so much more than a cult classic. It's one of the 3 films of John Carpenter's that I watch more often than any other. This is the first of those 3 that we'll talk about. The other 2 are coming up. But this film, it holds up. It's still powerful, and it speaks just as loudly today as it ever has. If you're a horror fan, a Carpenter devotee, or just someone who loves films with something to say, this is a must-watch. This is the kind of movie that should stick with you, that will challenge you, and most importantly will make you think about the world around you. Carpenter's vision was so ahead of its time, and They Live continues to be a piece of cinema that we cannot ignore. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget that next week we're diving into another Carpenter classic as we continue Phase 3 with Prince of Darkness. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. It's another wild ride into the realm of horror, mystery, and of course, existential dread. So make sure you're tuned in for that. But that's going to wrap up today's dive into the They Live. I really do hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. It's always a blast revisiting these films and unpacking everything that makes them so impactful. If you liked this episode, don't forget, follow us over on Instagram and Threads at Real Talk. Please leave a review. It helps the show out and keeps the conversations going. Your support means everything to me, and it's what keeps this podcast alive and thriving. And of course, don't forget, tune in next time as we continue to explore the brilliance of John Carpenter. Again, next week, we're taking a look at Prince of Darkness. Little side note, it's the second film in my 3 most watched that I just mentioned. Another gem in his collection you won't want to miss. But until then, stay creepy and think about what's going on around you.